Imagine the coziest dwelling ever constructed for harsh northern winters, yet it lacked glass panes, a chimney, and contemporary insulation. Nonetheless, it managed to sustain complete families across many generations. The solution wasn't larger fires. Instead, it was a long-forgotten approach, so clever that certain aspects continue to baffle today's engineers. For centuries, the Vikings have been celebrated for their world-conquering achievements. These include their longships, their fierce warriors, and their intrepid journeys across the treacherous waters of the North Atlantic. However, their most remarkable accomplishment never departed from the coastline. It lay quietly hidden under layers of soil and thriving turf. Upon initial inspection, a Viking longhouse appeared fairly unremarkable. It featured no glazed windows, no tall masonry chimney, no contemporary insulation, and no cutting-edge technology. From the perspective of a stranger, it was hardly more than a grassy hump protruding from the icy terrain. But looks can be misleading. Today's archaeologists consider the Viking longhouse to be among the most advanced instances of climate-responsive construction created prior to the Industrial Revolution. It was much more than just a place of refuge. It functioned as an entire thermal mechanism, with all components cooperating to sustain life during some of Europe's most severe winters. The walls, roofing, ground underneath the floor, airflow, body heat from inhabitants, and even animals were all integrated into one cohesive plan. Nothing was accidental. Nothing wasted energy, whereas modern homes frequently depend on robust heating systems to replenish heat that escapes. But the Vikings adopted a contrasting mindset. They thought the most intelligent form of warmth is the one that never leaks out. This basic concept influenced all their choices, and it might clarify why a dwelling constructed over a millennium ago still offers lessons for contemporary society. In order to grasp why Viking dwellings were so effective, we must first abandon a contemporary preconception. We tend to picture survival as a fight with nature, a desperate conflict waged using bigger fires, warmer clothing, and unlimited fuel. That's a compelling picture. Yet archaeology reveals a much more intriguing narrative. Excavated Norse settlements in Norway, Sweden, Denmark, Iceland, Greenland, and the Faroe Islands show a surprisingly uniform philosophy. Although building materials varied by region, the underlying principle remained unchanged. The Vikings never attempted to conquer winter. Instead, they adapted to it. Survival in the North Atlantic required effectiveness. Endless dark winters, harsh coastal winds, and scarce forests made each log of firewood count. Timber was extremely scarce in Iceland and Greenland, making driftwood from ocean currents a prized asset. Given these circumstances, relying on bigger fires was not a long-term answer. Rather, Viking constructors prioritized a far smarter approach, stopping heat loss at its source. Long before scientists could articulate heat transfer, the Vikings had mastered its fundamental concepts through trial and error. Their thick walls reduced heat flow, narrow doorways prevented cold drafts, and dense materials retained warmth. Every choice they made, from carefully managed ventilation to balancing fresh air and valuable indoor heat, had one goal. The Vikings grasped an enduring principle that continues to shape modern energy-efficient design. Heat that never escapes is heat that doesn't need replenishing. A major misconception about Viking dwellings is that they were merely tough wooden huts meant to withstand the cold. Excavations uncover a much smarter design. The frames were made of sturdy oak or pine beams. The real key to many Viking houses, particularly in Iceland, Greenland, and other North Atlantic communities, was the material packed around those timber frames, the ground itself. They carved large turf blocks, thick soil layers held together by live grass roots. These were stacked to form walls over 6 feet thick. To today's eyes, soil doesn't appear to be a high-tech construction material, but from a thermal physics standpoint, it worked extremely well. Every block had numerous small air pockets, which slowed heat loss similarly to contemporary fiberglass or mineral wool insulation. Simultaneously, the huge soil mass absorbed heat from the central fire, the residents, and even the animals. During the night, the soil gradually released the stored warmth. Today, engineers refer to this as thermal mass or thermal buffering. a concept the Vikings discovered just by coexisting with their environment. The home kept changing even after being built. Grass grew deeper into the walls, filling cracks, reinforcing the structure, and shielding it from weather. The longhouse was not simply placed on the site, it merged with the surroundings. After mastering heat retention in their walls, the Vikings discovered another heat source, a living, steady, and much more potent one than most of us would associate with winter warmth. Naturally, we picture fire. The Vikings also used fire, but they also tapped into an enduring heat source, life itself. Life itself. Excavations in northern settlements throughout Norway, Iceland, and Greenland show that in the harshest months, families often cohabited with cattle, sheep, goats, and occasionally horses. From a modern viewpoint, this might seem odd, yet it was a highly effective survival strategy. Every warm-blooded animal continuously emits heat. One cow produces several hundred watts of metabolic heat around the clock, offering a reliable warming source that required no firewood. The genuine intelligence, however, lay not just in housing animals inside, but in arranging the longhouse layout to harness that heat effectively. Animals were usually kept a bit lower than the elevated timber floors where people resided and slept. Since warm air rises naturally, the livestock's body heat rose up, softly heating the common area. Together with the heat from many individuals cooking, weaving, fixing tools, and sleeping under the same roof, the longhouse functioned as a dynamic thermal system. Each heartbeat played a part in staying alive. The Vikings grasped that heat didn't always need to be generated. Occasionally, it just needed distribution. In the Arctic North, winter involves more than just low temperatures. Wind often poses the biggest danger. Contemporary wind chill research validates what Viking builders learned over hundreds of years. Moving air removes heat much more quickly than calm air. Just one draft can chill a person or a whole structure alarmingly fast. Therefore, every aperture in a Viking longhouse was meticulously regulated. Large windows were uncommon, not just due to glass being rare and costly, but because any opening reduced the house's capacity to hold heat. For the Vikings, daylight had value, but holding on to heat was crucial. A home with less light was much safer than one that let treasured warmth escape into the icy air. This same logic influenced every doorway. Longhouse entrances were deliberately short and narrow, compelling people to stoop upon entry. This wasn't symbolic, it was practical design. Smaller gaps cut down on the influx of freezing air while slowing the loss of heated indoor air. Many Norse dwellings also featured a short entryway that functioned like a modern airlock, keeping the cold out before it could reach the living area. The Vikings recognized a straightforward principle that still influences energy-efficient building today. The heat that never leaves is the easiest to conserve. And that idea mattered most in the very core of the longhouse. A single fire quietly fueled an entire lifestyle. A fire burned at the core of every Viking longhouse, quite different from the fireplaces we commonly know today. There was no stone hearth against a wall, no cast iron stove, and no tall chimney guiding smoke safely upward. Rather, a long, open hearth ran down the middle of the structure, sometimes reaching over 30 feet in length. It acted as the home's cooking furnace, workshop, and meeting space all combined. Almost every part of daily life centered around this single line of flames. But the hearth did more than just generate heat. It stored warmth in the ground and surrounding area. Large stones slowly absorbed heat hour after hour. Even after the fire died, those stones kept releasing warmth far into the night. This resulted in a steady indoor temperature instead of sharp changes between hot and cold. Today's engineers call this thermal mass. To the Vikings, it was just ordinary wisdom. The type of fuel depended on the location. In Norway and Sweden's forests, hardwoods burned hot and lasted a long time. But in Iceland and Greenland, where big trees were rare, people mainly used peat dug from wetlands. Driftwood brought in by Atlantic currents, and even dried animal dung were also burned. In the most resource-scarce settlements, every fuel burned differently, and Viking families learned to adjust their hearths accordingly. Perhaps the most surprising aspect was what? The longhouse lacked a true chimney as we know it. That sounds risky, but letting all the warm air escape through a chimney would have squandered a huge amount of valuable heat. Instead, smoke rose slowly under the high roof and exited through adjustable vents. Near the ridge, it was a trade-off. Cleaner air would have meant colder nights. The Vikings chose warmth. Their fire was never meant to burn alone, but was intended to work in harmony with the entire house. Today, we view smoke as something to get rid of as fast as possible. The Vikings had a different perspective. Inside the longhouse, smoke ascended to the rafters and created a warm layer beneath the roof, while the lower living area stayed breathable. This layer functioned like an insulating blanket, slowing the quick loss of heat through the roof. The roof is where heat naturally rises and is most easily lost in any building. Smoke also served another purpose that archaeologists have come to value. It protected the structure itself. Tiny soot particles settled on timber beams and roof supports, forming a dry, protective coating that deterred insects. It slowed mold growth and reduced moisture harm. Centuries before chemical wood preservatives existed, the Vikings preserved their homes every single day simply by living in them. Airflow was kept under careful control. Roof vents could be opened more during cooking or warmer weather, then nearly shut during the coldest months. To preserve valuable heat, fresh air entered slowly through small openings near ground level, while warmer, smoke-filled air escaped gradually above. The house breathed, but it breathed slowly. Comfort was never the main objective. Survival was, and every bit of smoke reminded the inhabitants that even something unpleasant could become useful when understood rather than discarded. If the walls protected the longhouse from the cold, the roof completed the system. Constructing a Viking roof required much more than laying wooden beams across the top of a structure. First came a frame of heavy timbers strong enough to support immense weight. Over those beams, builders carefully placed sheets of birch bark rich in natural oils. Birch bark formed a remarkably durable waterproof barrier, stopping rain and melting snow from reaching the wooden frame beneath. Then came the turf layer. Thick layers of sod were stacked across the roof until it weighed several tons. That tremendous weight pressed down on the building, making it more resistant to powerful North Atlantic winds. While adding another massive layer of insulation above the living area, the roof continued to change long after construction ended. Grass took root in the turf season after season. Living roots held the layers together, sealed small cracks, and shielded the birch bark from sunlight and erosion. Instead of gradually deteriorating like many modern roofs, a well-kept turf roof often became more stable over time. From a distance, the house nearly blended into the landscape. It no longer appeared as something humans had forced upon nature. The structure appeared as if nature itself had constructed it. The majority of people instinctively remove snow from their dwellings. The Vikings frequently let it stay. They grasped a concept that modern winter explorers and polar researchers still acknowledge. Newly fallen snow contains numerous minuscule air pockets, rendering it one of the best natural insulators. When blizzards accumulated snow on the walls and roof, the longhouse grew increasingly effective. The snow closed off tiny gaps, halted icy drafts, and minimized the thermal contrast between the structure's exterior and the harsh outside atmosphere. What looked like entombment was in fact safeguarding. Whole Norse settlements could appear nearly engulfed by winter, leaving only their doorways and faint wisps of smoke visible, indicating that households remained cozy underneath that icy cover. Inside, temperatures stay far more consistent than outdoors, enabling humans, livestock, provisions, and important implements to endure extended periods of bitter cold. Winter had essentially become integrated into the house. Rather than fighting the season, the Norse let natural forces reinforce their dwellings. Very few societies have ever transformed a foe into a friend as thoroughly by winter's conclusion. A Norse longhouse was nearly undetectable, under coatings of snow, soil, and growing vegetation. But concealed under that tranquil terrain lay an extraordinary engineering achievement of the medieval era. No one innovation made it function. Neither the fireplace, nor the sod walls, nor the smoke, nor the livestock, nor the snow itself. The building's resilience stemmed from how each component aided the next. Heat was produced, retained, distributed, preserved, and finally permitted to dissipate gradually. Over a millennium later, modern architects are uncovering similar principles through strategies like passive building, vegetated roofs, and earth-bermed structures. Concepts like sealed building shells and thermal mass design, which contemporary science formulates with equations, were mastered by Viking constructors through centuries of experience. Their dwellings teach us that genuine creativity isn't solely about generating additional energy. Sometimes it's about reducing waste. Maybe that's the most important legacy of the Vikings. Their finest creation wasn't the vessel that transported them over the ocean. It was the dwelling that enabled them to endure and craft those ships originally. The longhouse transcended a mere refuge. It functioned as a life-preserving apparatus. And possibly that's the most remarkable aspect. It's not that the Norse conquered winter, but that they figured out how to harness it for their benefit. Thank you for accompanying Dark Origins on yet another exploration into history's overlooked stories. If this narrative altered your perspective on antiquity, keep following. Numerous overlooked inventions remain concealed under the layers of history, anticipating our eventual revelation, one finding at a time.